All right. Hello, my dear unknown friends. I'm Amicus, and welcome back to the channel. Um, just wanted to do a quick plug uh, towards my Substack. I'm now running a publication there called the Sophiurgist, where I plan on releasing an essay. I've had to break it up into parts as I work through it, and as the memory limit per email or per newsletter allows. So ideally, I wanted it to be one piece, but as I was editing it in the Substack text editor, I got a notification across the top that flashed this bright red that said, "You are approaching the limit for the email version." So I figured, well, I guess we'll go ahead and put it into a few parts. So you can find the first part of the essay in the description down below. Link to it is there. I hope, if you haven't read it yet, I hope that you feel free to do so. And while you're over there, please share your thoughts in the comment section of the piece. The article is called "On the Wondrous Works of Wisdom," and it is my attempt to sort of collate, compile all of my various ideas and statements that I've said related to the topic of Sophiurgy or Tom Bergian sacred magic. For those who are a little more in the know, as far as the lingo goes in the liturgical realism movement, also sometimes referred to as the re-enchantment movement, I now tend to fall into preferring to call it the liturgical realist movement, just because it harkens to this idea of the cosmic liturgy, which we start to see snippets of with patriarchs such as Saint Maximus the Confessor, who's considered one of the last patristics. And then sort of the theme is taken up much occasionally with Saint Bonaventure. And in more modern times, we see it with where is it? With Catherine Pickstock and her book After Writing on the Liturgical Consummation of Philosophy. So, but yes, so feel free to check the link down below to that Substack article if you are interested in a better distilled version of the things that I've talked about in live stream and in my videos here on this channel. Right. Let's see. Aside from that, this week I will be diving deeper into formatting and prepping my manuscript of the Hyperdulian Manual. I want to make an apology to those of you who may have tuned in last week, where I attempted to share with all of you my an early draft of my preface for the Hyperdulian Manual. Unfortunately, it would appear that I did not set up my audio for it. Thankfully, I gave a sort of a concise summary of the preface, both before and after, before we got a little off the deep end with the rest of that conversation, which will sometimes happen here. because again, if for those of you who haven't listened to the channel's trailer preview, which technically is my first video I've ever uploaded, I sort of go through what this channel is, why it exists. Ideally, and predominantly, it is my video journal. I work in healthcare. I am now a husband. And, my duties will first and foremost and always remain there first. And so sometimes I don't always have enough time to sit down to write things contemplatively, earnestly, and in silence. So, which is fine. I'm happy that there have been just over 800 of you who have subscribed, and I feel that I feel very blessed to have so many subscribers for as niche of topics as are covered here. But I have a sense that we're beginning to see a blossoming. I think we're seeing a blossoming of liturgical realism. There are many other writers and voices who have taken to speaking of this and fleshing it out, and to explain and taking lengths to explain the consequences of this realization and the consequences of actually taking it seriously, which I would argue we really should. Let's see. I'm trying to think if there's anything else before we get into the thick of things. I will share, as sort of a soft announcement, again, for anyone who tuned in last week, I made mention of the financial situation that my family now currently stands in, while we are waiting to go through with the processes related to my wife's immigration status. We are working on her adjustment of status, and so right now she is not able to work legally. And given the situation in the United States, I've told her that we need to be patient and to not do anything so under the table that it would come up as questionable and risk a denial of our application, which is not cheap. Thankfully, I am able to provide her with her healthcare needs through my employer, but with this comes great cost, which is going to eat into our monthly finances. So I have begun praying and contemplating on the ways in which I might be able to afford some extra income, and made a plea to all of you, my dear unknown friends, to possibly consider some form of support, some form of monetary support, if these videos and live streams and other content bear good fruit in your life. But one of the things I've always stressed with myself when I set out to do this channel was to make sure that the meat, the nutrition of the content is available for free. So what this means is these live streams will always be free, and the written version of my essays at the Sophiurgist will also be free. I've toyed with the idea of maybe doing some form of a book club where those who wish to join, we can all, for a very small stipend once a month, as a way to put towards the time and effort that goes into that would go into doing some more extra things. We could potentially do we could do a book club where we read passages from books, have a discussion, share our thoughts. I think that would be fruitful. I also, while I'm still toying with that particular idea, I have landed upon something a little more concrete. I know that on Substack, it is very common for the audio versions of most essays to be read aloud by an artificial intelligence. And I fear that, especially in the liturgical realism movement, to embrace the technology in that way, I think does the movement a disservice. I think that the best way to do narration of articles and essays would be to narrate them yourself. And I do have the means with which to record high quality audio. Thanks to my vice of collecting musical equipment. And so one of the things I've thought to do to provide some value for those who would wish to pitch in some shekels would be to offer a subscriber-only audio version that I think would be possible to download. I'll have to look into that a little bit more. But I would like to have an audio version of my essays available to subscribers that will be, that should and ought to be of a high audio caliber, a high caliber of quality, to the point where there may even be some ambience given in to it, along with some maybe some music, some light music, or some form of a theme song. That way, when you listen to it, you know it is an audio version of something by Ignotus Amicus. So that particular feature, for sure, I think is going to break the ice for opening up some form of light but meaningful monetization of the efforts here. Again, the content itself, the written content, will be for free. These live streams will remain for free. If ever we make it to 1,000 subscribers and 4,000 hours of watch time, maybe then we can open it up. To get those of you who would be willing to do super chats. I'm not. I don't know. I've always, super chats have sometimes rubbed me the wrong way. I guess it depends on the way in which it's implemented, depending on the channel and the type of content. I think for more spiritual type content, more things related to Christian mysticism and the like, it can sometimes rub me the wrong way. So I'm not sure how I feel about the idea of allowing for super chats if ever we get to the point. Which, and I guess we'll make this the last sort of the last plugging bit, shenanigans. The channel has now reached 839 subscribers. I really want to thank everybody who has subscribed thus far, and I am deeply grateful for those who keep returning, and for those who are newcomers who find good fruit to be had here. And so with that, I would earnestly ask if you would like to see this channel grow, if you think the work that we're doing here is important in any way, and if you think there are others who would greatly benefit from everything that we are discussing over here, please make sure to like and share and subscribe and all those things. Try to get us to 1,000. I would be happy if we get to 1,000 and it stays there. Just because I want to, I feel that the time is coming. We're getting closer to a period of contemporary history where we're going to see some incredible things and some incredibly horrific things. And I am convinced that this will be a time for those of us who feel a calling to Sophiurgy in the most earnest sense of the word, are going to be called to step it up and to honestly, earnestly, and with integrity live it out to the fullest, in full faith of revelation, tradition. So, if you want our voices here, like, yours in the live chat, if you want your voices heard, if you think that what I'm doing here is of any value, and you want to see, and if you want to see it get to a wider audience, that especially if you think that a wider audience needs to hear any of this sort of thing, I ask that you do what you can, share it with who you think would benefit, encourage them to subscribe, and to keep up with the weekly live streams, to find me on Substack, and to subscribe to me over there as well. So, all right, I think that's enough self-promotion. I can't say that I'm very good at it. I'm not particularly fond of doing it, but I know that that's how the game is played here. So, to whatever extent that we must, we'll play it. And real quick before we truly, honest to goodness, before we truly get into the thick of things, you'll notice that I've gone ahead and I've actually just taken slow mode off of the live chat. So if any ne'er-do-well would ever find this live stream and decide to just disrupt it, they can spam the chat now. I would ask that they don't, but yeah, I've gone ahead and taken off the 30-second slow mode. So any of your thoughts that come to you, please feel free to throw it up in chat, and we will go ahead and we will get started. So little years ago, 3 years ago, maybe more, around the time that I first started this channel, I did a video, I can't remember the exact title of it. I did a video about a recommended reading list for the Catholic occultist. And yes, I did intentionally choose somewhat of a title that is kind of clickbaity. It was like, Catholic occultist, what the heck is he talking about? And just as I think I did, I can't remember, But if I didn't in that video, I'm certainly going to do so here. I'm going to qualify what I mean by a Catholic occultist. Since those who tune in are probably going to see the title and get a little triggered, which I guess that's the point of clickbait, right? And that's how you get views. You rope them in while they're angry and keep them there. I don't know. Honestly, I only chose the title of this live stream to coincide with a previous video so that hopefully through the recommendations at the end of videos that it'll get tacked on to the end of this one, and that this stream will get tacked on as recommended to the end of the older video. So, but for those who are raging or intending to rage because of the title, what do I mean when I say Catholic occultist? As we know, the word occult simply comes from occultus, which is Latin for hidden, and in a modern colloquial sense, it's used as a proper noun with capitalization of the O to refer to anything and everything that involves witchcraft, divination, some of the non-Christian hermetic magic mumbo jumbo, such as that of the Hermetic Order of the Golden Dawn. I think, and there's a few others like the OTO, Thelema, Theosophy, sometimes Anthroposophy, but not always. Somehow the Anthroposophists tend to slip under the radar when people are talking about the big O occult. And Ouija boards and Satanism, Luciferianism, and all that fun stuff. All right, that's what people usually mean when they refer to occultism. Now, and that's all fine. Like, as long as we make that distinction, then it is perfectly reasonable to use that word to describe those things. Granted, these days they work more overtly than they do occultly. They're a lot more, the people in those circles tend to be a lot more open about the things that they're doing. But to be sure, just about all of those things that tend to fall under big O occultism falls under Tomberg's third category of magic, which is that of sorcery. If at the least, it falls under Tomberg's second category of personal magic, which again, if you happen to have a copy of Meditations on the Tarot, it's first page of chapter 3, or letter 3, on the Empress. Nice big old paragraph where he lays out his categories of the more practical magics, and then he kind of widens the scope later on. But yes, personal magic and sorcery are the two categories of magic as defined by Tomberg that most, if not all, big O occultism practices. And that can be from the alchemical arts to the astrological arts to the ritual arts, and so on and so forth. Anything related to Solomonic magic, the things related to Madame Blavatsky, spiritualism, things of that nature, all that falls within what is called what is either personal magic or sorcery. With that being said, things such as alchemy and astrology they do have their slight there is nuance, and the reason for us to assume that there is by the virtue of the way in which many saints who were theologians treated the issue of astrology, and especially in the person of St. Thomas Aquinas, we see Thomas Aquinas speak of astrology in a way fairly different from the conception of most of the pagan Greeks and Romans, wherein for the pagan Greeks and Romans, the stars fated your life, that you were subject to their celestial influence, whereas for Thomas Aquinas, he proposes that there is an influence upon the more corporeal nature of things and the humoral nature of things, but the soul is ultimately not completely subject to them. And the way that this is possible is by the very fact that God provided human souls with free will. And it is because of free will that we are capable of contradicting the stars. This is not, but he later goes on to clarify, this is not to say that because of our concupiscence and because of original sin, we are not fully emancipated from the influences of the stars. But that only comes about in the instance that we are not self-reflective, that we are not examining our conscience. And so, the unexamined life leads to being trapped in the cycle of fate, of destiny, of karma, if you will. So, just as an example, that there are things that today are associated with big O occultism that in and of themselves are actually fairly traditional, and traditional conceptions of the way in which one works with the natural world and with the psyche, and the relationship of those two things to each other and how they interact with each other was studied in a more holistic way through means of alchemy and astrology. So, and in fairness, we have three saints of the Church who are currently reposed in their relics in the Cathedral of Cologne in Germany, and it's the three Magi. The relics of the three Magi are in Germany right now, and they would not be there if they didn't take the signs that they read in the stars to be true. And we know that the things they saw in the sky were true, because we were told in Genesis that God established the lights in the heavens to be for signs. And so the question is, signs of what? The difference is we have to make sure that we maintain the freedom of the will, and that the way to escape the influence of the stars is by self-reflection, is through examination of conscience, through contemplation, meditation, and just being diligent, testing spirits. We have to do all these things. So when I say in the title of this video, Catholic occultism, I'm referring to the more traditional mindset, the more holistic mindset, the mindset that was present in St. Hildegard von Bingen when she wrote her book of medical remedies. That is what I mean when I say Catholic occultism. So as we get into this list of book recommendations, I want you all to bear in mind that that we're not strictly speaking of modern, contemporary, big O occultism. We're referring to a much older conception of reality that was held by the majority of the saints, even those saints who lived post-scientific revolution, or should I say the scientific revolt against God's creation. So where to begin? Where I would like to start off the recommended reading list should easily, it's easy, it's first and foremost, and I'll try to grab the books that I'm recommending off my shelves as I go, so you can see them, and that way it's easier for you to find, because I'm not going to have the time to type them all out in the description with links and everything. So so if you need to pause the video to get a decent look at the cover, please do so. But first and foremost, and I think I actually have a copy. I have 2 copies of this book. One was the first copy of it that I read initially, that has all my yellow highlight marks in it, and then I have another copy that includes some appendices and notes. And that book, first book I would recommend to the aspiring Sophiurgist, is Tomberg's, go here, try to get the glare off, Valentin Tomberg's Meditations on the Tarot. Now, it's supposedly, it was written anonymously, and it has been revealed, it was eventually revealed that Valentin Tomberg was its author. So this is the Tracker Penguin edition. It's a paperback. The font size is not too bad. It seems smaller than it actually is. And so while sometimes it can be a little intimidating to see a full page spread and be like, oh my God, it's such dense reading. And in one respect it is, but in another respect, as far as like the actual layout of the print and everything, it's actually not too bad. Once you get into the habit of reading as many pages as you can in, say, an hour, it ends up not being too terribly bad. So this is the Tracker Penguin version, and then I also have over here, I have the Angelico Press hardcover version. The reason for this is because it has in the back, if I can find it, it has an appendix that's called the Early Studies on the 14th through 22nd Major Arcana of the Tarot. And it's just a sort of like these brief notes that Tomberg had written as he was planning out the letters themselves. And they've been transcribed so that they're legible. Very invaluable. It kind of gives a sense of sort of the pattern of his thinking, which can help in sort of unpacking some of the passages that are inside here. This is, one of the things that I'll refer to the YouTuber Roger Buck, fantastic channel. One of the things that he often mentions in his videos and in his blog Coriezo Sacratissimum is that this book is like 1,000 books rolled into one. It can be very dense reading. It is not reading. It's not something that you can read in a year. If you give it an honest, intentional contemplative reading, where you're actually trying to comprehend as best you can what it is that's being said. Sure, you can speed read it, but I wouldn't recommend it. I tried that and it didn't work, and so I started from the beginning and took my time with it. And sometimes there will be passages where you have to pause and you have to really sit with some of the things that he talks about until you have some inkling that it's okay to move on, even if you may not fully understand things. Because eventually you'll get to a point in the book later on where all of a sudden the things that he says there connect in a way that wouldn't if you hadn't read specifically what he said about the similar subject earlier in the book. So highly, highly recommend. Another reason why I put this at the top is because for the aspiring Sophiurgist, this is where you will find the third letter on the Empress, wherein he lays out his definition of magic, both in terms of a practical art, but don't like it, to say practical is not very accurate, and should have a qualifier to it, which we can go into in a different video. But I contend that that there's two types of magic that he refers to: a more particular type and a broader type. And I make mention of the distinction in my Substack essay, or the first part of the Substack essay in the link below. So yes, Meditations on the Tarot would be my number one pick for someone who is who's Catholic, who may or may not have come from an occult background. This book was written for people who were in the thralls of big O occultism of the time, so the 70s, late 60s, early 70s. And this book is an appeal to those types of people because Tomberg was one of them. And it's his appeal to bring them back to Christ, back to Christendom, while showing them the things that they were searching for in occultism are fulfilled and are actually viable, potent, and incredibly powerful, but only if it is done in and through Christ. So that I would say is the main crux of this book. Everything else, while it's not window dressing, it's all important. He ties so many things together. But I would say that's sort of like the overall thesis is, if you're an occultist, come back to the church, come back to the traditions of the church. Everything that you thought you could find in occultism is in the church. And he lays out what those things are and where you can find them, or sort of like a starting point of where you can find them. Some warnings that I will give to those who have heard things about Tomberg and Meditations on the Tarot. Do not judge the book by its cover or its title, or the fact that it uses the images of tarot as a springboard for the topics that Tomberg discusses. They are They are a window with which he uses to speak on many issues, and even goes so I would even go so far as to say that in this book he successfully he sort of de-divinitizes the tarot by choosing the Tarot de Marseille as his springboard. He does not even pay lip service to the Rider-Waite Tarot or the Crowley Tarot or any of the other iterations of the tarot. He focuses specifically on the French Tarot de Marseille, while doing that, he basically kicks the wind out of the sails of diviners who use the tarot. By the time you finish reading this book, you'll never be able to look at tarot cards the same way ever again. If you are Christian and you're concerned about divination and you read this book, you'll look at the tarot in a more favorable way, not as a means of divination, but as almost like as icons. They're just emblems. And I have a video on my channel, which you can go find, where I talk about this, where I try to formulate this idea that they are just cards. But they're emblems. They fall under this entire literary genre that was called emblemata. It was a fairly popular genre. Usually the emblems would be accompanied by verse. And I get into the whole history in that other video, so I would go and check that out there. So on the one hand, if you're a Christian and were suspicious of things related to divination, rest assured, excuse me, this book will make you realize that yes, they are just cards. The artwork on the cards, though, that there is something to the artwork in the cards. Not to be used as a form of divination, but as a prompt for contemplation, a prompt for meditation. Similar to the way we view religious art and meditate upon the religious art that we see, whether it's icons, paintings, sculptures, or even when we conjure in our imagination the scenes from scripture related to the mysteries of the Rosary. That's where Tomberg takes the tarot and situates them. He cleanses the tarot of the superstition and provides new life for the emblems on the cards, and then hints at a possible course of meditation that you could follow if you so chose, where you would start to incorporate the pip cards. I haven't tried doing that. I've heard others have. So that was my first recommendation for the Aspiring Sophiurgist, Meditations on the Tarot by Valentin Tomberg. All right, subsequent to that, I would recommend another of Tomberg's works. This is Lazarus. Some editions render it Lazarus Come Forth. This edition, I prefer this edition. I prefer a lot of Angelico Press's editions of some of these works. So now, in fairness, I am just past halfway. But I have it on good authority by those that I have spoken to who are better versed in Tomberg than I, that as soon as you finish Meditations on the Tarot, you have to read this as a follow-up. This is a fantastic just a fantastic sort of look into the 7 miracles in John's Gospel juxtaposed against the 7 days of creation in Genesis. And we'll just call it, it's this entire book is just a meditation on the relationship between those two. And while I don't recall Tomberg using the word cataphasis, but what he's doing is he's analyzing, he's meditating upon this cataphatic reflection of the 7 days of creation and the 7 miracles in the Gospel of John. And, he draws these one-for-one comparisons, shows how the miracle relates and renews what was happening on that particular day of creation. Absolutely fantastic. In Meditations, Tomberg talks about the sort of the law of analogy. Not that it's a law, but it's basically there's a principle. There's the principle of analogy. The law of correspondence is another way to put it, or the golden chain of being, as is put by Hermeticists. It's this idea that meaning occurs within all the strata of reality, the metaphysical strata of reality, and in the temporal sphere, the material sphere here, symbols and the things that they're constructed of communicate something higher. Right? And the example that he uses in Meditations is the liturgy, the sacraments. And so in Lazarus, what Tomberg does is he demonstrates what he means by the law of analogy. He demonstrates the symbols and their potency. And in so doing, he demonstrates the common link that they have to have in order for them to be effectual, in order for the sacred magic to be efficacious. And it has to do with the logos, the logos logoi relationship. It has everything to do with why we do things in the name of Christ. So fascinating stuff. Well worth the read. I can't wait to finally finish it, but I'm putting it as the number 2 recommendation because it is a fantastic follow-up that kind of demonstrates everything Tomberg sort of waxes on about in Meditations. And it's not, comparatively, it's not too bad. So I would highly recommend picking this up. Let me put this back on the shelf here. We'll move on to the next one. All right, let's see. Next up, we've got... this is another one from Angelico Press. This is A Metaphysics of the Christian Mystery, with an introduction to the work of Jean Barea by Bruno Berard, or Bruno Bayard. I've been told my French sucks, so if I mispronounce the names, don't hold me to it. This is a nice little brief, though fairly dense, introduction to the philosophy and theology of Jean Barea. Jean Barea's main focus is, again, it's touching upon the same themes that we see in Meditations on the Tarot. This idea of the law of analogy, the law of correspondence, that symbols are meaningful and they have potency, and they have the ability to act upon us and upon the world. And the question then is, what is it that the symbol relates to? And of course, the only true symbols are those that relate to the author of all things. Now, this is not me saying that the Eucharist is just a symbol, but the Eucharist is symbolic of something, even though it also is transubstantiated and becomes the true body and blood, soul, and divinity of Jesus Christ. All right, it just appears to us as bread, and the fact that it's bread ties into the symbolism of bread, even though our Lord is truly substantially present there in the Eucharist. But that's just as an example, and so please don't knock me for being Lutheran or Protestant or whatever if I waffle on too much about symbolism, even if it relates to sacraments. I understand they bestow signifying grace. Sacraments are deadly serious. I believe what the Catholic Church teaches about the sacraments, so just bear with me. All right. So in this book, we see, and there's all kinds of awesome diagrams. So many diagrams, and so many of my notes. So many of my notes that I took here. I even made little doodles. Like I made. There's this one place here. Page 25. There's this nice little diagram that they put in there. I encourage you to read it if you want to get an idea of what that diagram is talking about. But as you can see, I have my little doodle there, and if you recognize that, that's the Tetractys, the Pythagorean Tetractys. Why did I put it there? Well, because a lot of what I was reading in here, just every time that they started to describe sort of a rough shape of the ideas, such as this diagram, I'm reading the diagram and everything, and all of a sudden I'm seeing this. Oh my goodness gracious! It's just the Tetractys. It's a shame he didn't think to use the Tetractys in this book. Let's see. Let's try to find you another example of a diagram that ended up getting some doodles. Let's see. Yes. Yep. Oh, golly. Yep, it's just on the next page here. So there's this, there's a section that says, although there is no universal esotericism, yet esotericism is, as a spiritual approach, something universal. And he just sort of goes through this all, and as I'm reading it, I'm hit with I'm losing my little note card. When I read this, I had just finished reading Wolfgang Smith's The Vertical Ascent, and had watched the film about him called the what was the movie called? It was a documentary about Wolfgang Smith and his where he talks about vertical causality, and they show the cosmic icon. And so at the time I was reading this, the cosmic icon was really fresh in my mind. And sure enough, I reading this one passage, and I've got it all marked up with, some corresponding things. I don't know. You could say that D and C are related in this correspondence to the icon that I made here. But yeah, I'm due for a reread of this. Oh gosh, yeah, that's just, man, I'm going through this entire this little introduction. It was just absolutely fascinating. There were even some instances where I came across some things, and the way that the diagrams were rendering in my mind, I was even drawing some interesting parallels to some of the diagrams that I've seen related to the writings of Jakob Burma. Specifically one involving well, I'll just show it here. Let's see. All right, there. I don't know if you can see that right there. That little diagram there. I've seen something very similar to this in an illustration found in, I think it was the Aurora of Jakob Burma. And this little table here is talking about sources of the grace of theological knowledge and the modes of theological gnosis. There's illumination, tradition, and scripture. There's the subjective, the objective, and the mixed. The mixed being this theoretical knowledge, the subjective being the lived experience of the individual. But yeah, this book was such gold, and I wanted to, and I remember reading it because my goal was, I'm going to read this and then I'm just going to dive in. Yeah, it was, this gave a lot of food for thought, a lot of stuff to contemplate about. And so this would be my third recommendation for the aspiring Catholic occultist, is to read this as an introduction. And then as I'm gearing up to do starting next month, starting in March, I believe. No, hold on. Let me see here. Let me get my little planner out. I planned out my reading list this year. So let's see. So I've read Mariology Volume 1. I'm in the middle of the intellectual life. So March is going to be the Iliad. So then when am I doing May? No. Wow, really? Why did I do this to myself? I really want to dig into Jean Barea sooner, but for whatever reason, I decided that I'm going to read one of what is considered a good primer to his thinking by Barea himself, being The Broken Ring, which has just recently been translated into English. I know that there's a lot more of his that has yet to be translated, but there's already a good bit, and I've made sure to get my hands on just about everything in English by him, specifically through Angelico Press. So I guess May, I will be reading The Broken Ring, and will be really doing my deep dive into Barea. But with that being said, and even though I haven't yet gone through it all, this book opened up Meditations on the Tarot for me more than any other book. And so I owe a lot to some of my more recent developments and recent ideas that I have been sharing on this channel, and some of my newer articulations of some of the things I talk about here, I owe to this book. This little book was a real turning point for me, and so I would recommend it to any of you aspiring Sophiurgists or Catholic occultists. Again, scare quotes, occultists. All right. Next up on the recommendeds. Ooh, that's a good question. What should I recommend next? Okay. Well, this one would, these aren't in any particular order. All right, I'm not saying you have to read these exactly in order, although I would say you probably should read Meditations first. But so this is, so if you're off put by Meditations on the Tarot, you think it's too long, too dense, and you want to kind of ease into things, I'm going to recommend a book. And this was the book that I came across first before I came across Meditations. And this is the book that really helped to push me back towards the Catholic faith. This was the book that helped me to get back into the confessional, to get back into a state of grace, get right with my family and everything as it regards the faith, and helped lead me to finally pursue my confirmation. And it was this little self-published book, The Magic of Catholicism, Real Magic for Devout Catholics. At the time that I came across this book, I had fallen away from the faith. I've told this story in other videos, and but there were a number of things that occurred in my life as I was about to take the plunge into big O occultism, that somehow managed to bring this book into my radar enough that I was spared from getting in too deep with the darker stuff, the less pious stuff. And this is, it says it's by Brother Ada. For those of you who don't know, now on the internet he goes by Agostino Taumaturgo. He was he is a bishop. He's a Catholic bishop. Though these days I think he's more inclined to the independent sacramental movement, as far as I've been able to tell. And but in any event, this book, while its title reads that it's possibly not a very orthodox book, what's hilarious is inside this book is basically just a catechism. This is a book of magic. This is a catechism disguised as a book of magic. And one of the things that really helped kind of push me back on the track to returning to the faith was just with some form of I guess you could call it clarity. He defines magic as applied theology, which I thought was useful for me and the headspace I was in, the paradigm I was on the verge of entering. And so, yeah, something about this book really helped. So yeah, I highly, for those who don't want to get too thick into Tomberg starting out, this is a good place to start right here. He has another book that I would also recommend. I'm trying to see where it's at. It's on here somewhere. I just only recently undid my book boxes after having moved, so everything's a little disheveled. But he has another book called The Way We Do Things, and it is a book about about Benedicaria, which is a folk healing practice out of Italy and Sicily that that may have at one point began as pagan folk healing practices, but then eventually became baptized, became restored in Christ, and so nothing in Benedicaria can ever really be done outside of the name of Christ the way that it is today. Even though there are movements, neo-pagan movements, that are seeking to try to restore the more pagan versions of Benedicaria. So yeah, see, another recommendation. Obviously, you should have a copy of the Bible. And while I've not been the best in the past at trying to keep an active perusal of the scriptures as outside of the propers for the masses on Sunday, which I would sometimes read ahead of time and kind of contemplate, sometimes over the course of the week. This year, as part of my attempt to kind of bolster my my participation in this sort of idea of the 2026 Renaissance man sort of trendy BS, I've gone ahead and I've started up reading I've taken the Bible in a year, the way that the Bible in a Year podcast lays out how to read all of Scripture in a year. And so I've been reading now. I don't read it exactly every day. I will, like when I have my 2 12-hour shifts, I'll wait, and then on my first day off next, I catch up, so that there's a little bit more of a chunk to read than just these quick little passages. Because when I read, I like to read. I like to have more dedicated more time to reading, because I feel that it gets me into the zone. And I'm noticing with reading scripture more intently than I have in the past, I'm noticing little connections are being made. I'm beginning to recognize things that I'd never really recognized before, and I owe it all to grace. It's nothing that's happening on my own. It's all on the part of grace. All right, what else? What else would be a recommendation? Yes, okay. So before I give one recommendation, we're gonna go with Trithemius and Magical Theology, a chapter in the controversy over occult studies in early modern Europe by Noel L. Bran. Now, this is unfortunately some crappy republished version, probably done by some scammer on Amazon, which I really regret that I fell for it. With that being said, I do appreciate that it is... I thought there were some pages that were jacked up. I guess not. Well, there's a stupid little copyrighted material thing at the bottom. But anyhow, so for those who are really persnickety about how one obtains their books, I do apologize. I did get this one off Amazon. Unfortunately, at the time that I bought this, there really wasn't all that much information about sellers. So, so there's that, yeah. But in any event, this, I think, is a really important dissertation, essay, treatise about Johannes Trithemius, the abbot of Spanheim, who is thought to have been the the tutor and mentor of both Paracelsus, which I find more dubious, and that of Agrippa of Nettesheim. And the reason I would recommend this is because it gives a more scholarly, academic, atheistic sort of view of things that were happening around Trithemius and his ideas. It gives you access to some of the thoughts of his critics, and it gives a decent representation of his particular thought on what magic was, how he defined magic, which I would say Tomberg's definition can sometimes share. And one of the definitions that Tomberg props up as like the prime definition is from Joseph Peladon, who was a French occultist, 19th century, I believe. And his definition of magic was that magic was the art of the sublimation of man. Sublimation being that, it's related to the alchemical process where you go from the solid to the gaseous state without passing through the liquid state, and is often associated with a very strong purification of the material being sublimated, hence the Latin etymology of the word, which comes from sublimare, which is to lift up, and then there's another word that means to elevate, to make lofty. And so, and I suspect Peladon may have known about some of the letters, some of the letters of Trithemius. Now, unfortunately, I haven't been able to find the actual letters that Trithemius wrote to one of his correspondents by the name of Ganet. But thankfully, some of the juicier bits were put in this study of the whole controversy surrounding Trithemius. So, like in one place, Trithemius speaks about people who he warns about the same people Tomberg warns about, the charlatans, the ones whose effort is has no concentration, those who have their own ends in mind when they attempt or pretend to attempt sacred magic and so on and so forth, charlatanry, all the things that genuinely that led to a genuine negative reaction to many of the individuals who attempted some of these practices and upheld some of the theories. Let's see. Yeah, so here, right here. This is why one of the reasons I recommend this is to get these little snippets from Trithemius, because they're honestly really worth sort of contemplating and thinking about, and help to bring a lot of what Tomberg talks about kind of into better focus. And so to Ganet, Trithemius had said, quote, "For truly we would have magic to be understood as nothing else but wisdom, that is, the discernment of things both physical and metaphysical, which knowledge is dependent upon a power resident within both divine and natural things." And then a little earlier on, there's a little passage where he talks about, where he lays out an alchemical sequence, the way in which magic has its efficacy, and he lays it out as such that study generates knowledge, knowledge prepares love, love similarity, similarity communion, communion virtue, virtue dignity, dignity power, and power performs the miracle. Now, of course, the power being that the power comes from God. It's bestowed as a grace. Yeah, really, very, very interesting. And a very well worth. This is a very worthy, very worthy piece to read. It helps to give some context, some historical context to the controversies surrounding the subject of magic and alchemy, but it also helps to provide an older and better articulated understanding of with probably some more familiar vocabulary than what someone who's never read Tomberg before is used to seeing. So would recommend this. And once you've read this, then I would recommend you all move to the big one. The Three Books of Occult Philosophy by Heinrich Cornelius Agrippa von Nettesheim. All right, so this is the Inner Traditions edition that was translated from the original Latin edition of 1533 by Eric Purdue. Now, Eric Purdue is a bit of an eccentric. He is genuinely an occultist. With that being said, he is academically honest. And by that, I mean he has put a lot of study, very prudent and careful study of the Latin, and has been able to render, despite his personal practices and whatever that may indicate, he was able to set all that aside to render a faithful and well-researched and well-cited edition of three books. Now, the reason that I am putting this here is because, and it's specifically this edition compared to the Tyson edition, is that the Tyson edition, the Tyson edition is incredibly lacking and has a bias. The Tyson edition is biased towards a pro Golden Dawn, pro Theosophical, pro New Age rendition. It's based off of a fairly erroneous, or it's based off of an English translation, highly containing some very erroneous translations and renditions of words. This edition has sought to correct all of those. And in having compared the two, the Eric Purdue translation is by far the best. It is the best. I know that Black Letter Press has an edition, a smaller digest edition of the three books, but in fairness, I think they go with the JF French translation, the earliest English translation, again, which contains error. And whenever we're approaching these subjects, clarity, accuracy are important. The devil is in the details. So we want to make sure that we have the most accurate rendition at our disposal for perusing these subjects. Now, it will not be difficult for anyone who aspires to practice Sophiurgy to discern to discern the content within this edition. Again, what's very special about this edition is that it contains citations. And what is quite interesting is that the references, the source material that Agrippa is drawing upon comes from a number of very familiar sources that would have been available to every Thomist, to every scholastic, to every theologian, to every physician. From references to ancient Roman medicinal writings, to Saint Albert the Great, and a Franciscan who wrote his own compendium based off of sources that he had, that many of which no longer exist, but for his referencing them in the De Harmonia Mundi, which is this massive text which there are digital editions of, but they as of yet have not been translated into English. I think that would be a very worthy project for anyone who's a Latinist and who studies the history of Western esotericism. De Harmonia Mundi is a work that needs to be translated into English. There is no excuse for why it isn't. So, much of the material, especially in the first volume of this book, focuses mostly on natural philosophy. And so a lot of that is going to come down to references to St. Albert the Great, as well as references to some ancient Roman writers. Then when you get into the second volume, you're going to come across more of the what you would call more of the questionable things. And but again, the sources for the most part are researched and provided in footnotes, so that you can look for them yourself and verify them for yourself if you so choose. And so usually the second section is going to deal with a lot of more traditional astrology, the same type of astrology that would have been used both by medical practitioners of the time, but also by many of the diviners and charlatans of the time that were condemned. But there's also enough of traditional astrology in here that would fall under what was acceptable in Christendom for the purposes for medical purposes. And seeing as our ancestors had more of a holistic view of human health compared to what we have today, I would that's another reason why I would recommend this edition. Then of course we get to the third volume, where you're going to come across more of a compendium of the various practices that originate from ancient times, from ancient pagan times, from late antiquity as well. Many references to Iamblichus and Proclus. And so those are some of the things, some of those things you have to take with a large grain of salt, and you have to remember that there's a reason that that Catholic liturgy, both East and West, is the way it is, that there's a reason why the symbology of everything that's done in the ritual is the way it is. And as far as the psychology and the ontology and the epistemology associated with that, it is expressed in the third volume in a vocabulary that was more common back then, that I have seen more contemporary renditions of, using a slightly different vocabulary in people like Tomberg, and from things that I've seen also in glancing passes at passages in Berea. Most of the Pennsylvania Dutch Bracherij, many of them actually would have had a copy of this in one form or another in their library, because again, it is a source book it's also a source book, especially in the first volume, of all the natural philosophy, all the things that go into making remedies and such. Now, of course, today there are many things that we now know are incredibly poisonous and hazardous to your health. So please bear that in mind. So yes, and I would probably say to make sure with before you ever touch this, and this is very important, you need to make sure that that you are keeping up with your daily prayer, keeping up with your spiritual life, your liturgical life, and I would probably read everything else that I've recommended up until this point before you ever touch this. I probably could have spared myself a lot of confusion and diversions had I waited to read this. And it's part of the reason why I feel obligated to make this video, because I feel that my previous video of recommendations was more informed by having approached this earlier than I honestly should have. So mea culpa, and here we are. I'll give you an updated rendering. Now, I haven't read it yet, but I have it on some other's authority that that this is also worthy to read. Might even be a good one to read before getting into 3 books. This could be thought of as a primer to 3 books of occult philosophy. And this is it's a facing translation. So you got the Latin on the one side and the English on the other, so that if you're more academic and if you're a Latinist, take that for what it's worth. So again, I haven't read it, but on various authorities besides myself, I've been told that this is a good primer, if not something worth reading immediately after 3 books of occult philosophy. All right, let's see. I have to go into my book cabinet here for the next recommendation. Before I get to the next recommendation, why don't I go ahead and look at some comments. So Lone Star Catholic says, you can also see Tomberg's influence on JP2's 2 encyclicals against the New Age and Eastern meditation. Spiritual exercises are Christocentric and organic, and not some naturalistic technology. Exactly. I think you might be right. It's reasonable to assume that. And even if it isn't true, for sure, the Eastern meditation in the New Age is not. It is a form of charlatanry on the part of the New Age, and on the part of Eastern meditation, and all those practices, it is an attempt at mastery over things for which you aren't supposed to have mastery over. And that's where it enters the realm of personal magic and or sorcery. Lone Star also says, Berea is a Catholic version of what one could call a phenomenological perennialist, since he baptizes the perennialism of Guénon with the hermeneutical phenomenology of Paul Ricoeur and Henry Corbin, or Henri Corbin. I will admit I am not as familiar with those latter two philosophers. As far as phenomenology, I don't know that I currently operate under an accurate assumption of what phenomenology means or how it's defined. When I look at the word itself, I kind of just take its prefixes and suffixes. So I'm assuming phenomenology is roughly translated to mean the study of phenomena, which sounds an awful lot like what Tomberg is doing. Whether or not that's what Berea is doing, I'm not sure yet, until I can really sink my teeth into his work. But interesting thought, one that I'll put on the back burner, and in case I come across anything that may suggest what you are suggesting. Lone Star also says that symbol, meaning the one. I guess I better pull it back out. Because I was actually looking at the screen when this comment came up. All right, so Lone Star is referring to this symbol right there. I might even have it upside down, actually. So imagine that the dark is on the bottom and the light is on the top, okay? But Lone Star says that symbol is the conjunction of the light world, dark world, and fire world in Burma's thought, the fire being the mean between the two. Yeah, and now I will admit I have not yet dove into Jakob Burma. If you've seen my book review on In Quest of Catholicity by Wolfgang Smith, where he republishes letters between himself and Father Malachi Martin, there are some fascinating conversations that they're having in there about Jakob Burma and Jakob Burma's theology, and how if circumstances had been better, Burma might have been Catholic and might have been able to give voice to a more familiar might have given a more familiar vocabulary to describe the things that he had experienced. So, but I'm not going to sit here and say whether or not that's worthy to pursue for a regular normie Catholic or anything. Something that I might investigate in the future, but I still have some fundamentals that I'm in the process of establishing. So with that said, I'm not sure exactly what the dark world is referring to. The fire world, or what any of those mean. When I think in terms of these triplicities, I think of it in terms of body, soul, and spirit, corpus, animus, and spiritus, which I find to be more of a relation to Wolfgang's cosmic icon, where, in fact, I'll hold it right side up, where the dark is corpus, the white is spiritus, and the middle would be animus, sort of corresponding to the vertices, the axis, and the circumference of the cosmic icon, At least that's how I've seen it. Lone Star also says Agostino Tonratogo's booklet on the Rosary is quite helpful as well. I don't think I've seen it. I don't think I have it. Probably because I already have plenty of literature about the Rosary and the use of the Rosary, and also I think that booklet on the Rosary might also already be in his Magic of Catholicism book, or at the very least in his Christian ritual book. Lone Star also says, von Bader also defines magic from its etymological connection to magnetism and imagination, as done by the will. I will say I have always been a little leery about von Bader. I'm not sure about his etymology either. Something that I'll have to look into. And so I thank you for the invitation to do more research, because I just can't get enough reading. While everyone else is playing video games and chasing OnlyFans models online, I am reading and praying and reading and praying and writing and reading and praying, and it is wonderful. It is wonderful. I love it so much. Every once in a while I'll play a game, mostly a card game or a board game. It's been a long time since I've played any video games. Not that I don't have them. I do. I just haven't played them as much as I once did. All right. Finishing up current chat, we have Jacobite Wiseman saying, on the topic of astrology, I have a vague idea for a sci-fi akin to Star Wars, but with geosystems rather than star systems fiction it will be. Christian inspiration. I say go for it. I'd say modernity is desperate for science fiction with a Christian telos. I think the closest thing that we have had would probably be C.S. Lewis's sci-fi trilogy. I think it's called That Hideous Strength is one of the books, Out of the Silent Planet. But, that being said, it's C.S. Lewis, so it's going to be technically Protestant, ultimately. But as far as full-on Catholic science fiction, there's a dark, gritty sci-fi. I think his name's Brian Niemeyer. He's written a whole series of science fiction novels that is based off of Thomistic theology. I have the 10th anniversary edition of it. I can't remember what it's called for the life of me. Boy, that's a bummer. But at some point, I would like to. I have it. I'll get around to reading it at some point. But I think first, before I really do that, I need to get some of the classics back in. My plan for the year is to read 3 of the classics. I've got the Iliad, the Odyssey, and the Aeneid lined up. And then if I have time, I'm going to throw in Dante's Divine Comedy. I think by the end of the year, when I get around to it, I think Angelico Press will be publishing the third and final part of the Divine Comedy in its newest translation from the guy behind Beauty Matters on Substack. So I'm looking forward to getting my hands on all 3 of those so that I can just read through them. All right, one more chat comment before we finish up some more recommendations here. Another from Lone Star Catholic. Would read Burma only with the commentary of von Bader. and not other sources, since von Baader critiqued false interpretations such as from Hegel, which interpreted him in a pantheistic sense. Okay. All right, that gives me a little bit of that affords me to give a little bit of grace to von Baader, I guess. Yeah, for sure. I know I would avoid Hegel like the plague. Like the plague. His concept of the thesis and antithesis coming together to form the truth is it just that's never boded well, and we see the fruits of that right now in the church, unfortunately. I argue in a brief section in my Substack essay in the description, I argue that the synthesis is that it's not a synthesis, it's a conjunction. It's a consummation between not a thesis and antithesis, which would be negative A plus A, which just is zero, gives birth to nothing. My contention is that A plus B equals C, that A complements B and B complements A, and together in wedlock, in matrimony, they consummate and give birth to C. So yeah, I personally, and here on this channel, and I would argue if you want to be a Sophiurgist, you have to reject Hegel's dialectic. You have to reject the Hegelian dialectic, because A cannot give birth if it consummates itself with itself. One could even say that negative A and A, like negative A plus A, is gay. It's a homosexual union. Sure, you can calculate like if we're speaking in terms of a mathematical operation, yeah, you can calculate minus A plus A, but it's going to give you zero. It's not going to give birth to anything. Whereas A plus B will always equal C. The marriage of complements, and this is something that I think, I don't know if it's a mistranslation issue or if it's a semantics issue, but I suspect that the marriage of opposites that the alchemists were going on about is actually not about oppositions. That whatever seems to be opposite it's just in appearance, and that what's really happening is that it's the marriage of complements, and that it's the marriage of complements that affords everything that happens, that makes alchemy efficacious. Because they're in God, because in God there are no opposites. There's only particular complementaries. All right, so enough of that. We'll get back to a few more recommendations, and then we'll call it quits. So going off of Jacobite's comment on astrology, my next recommendation, we're gonna get from up in here. All right, now I'm going to make a caveat to this, so that because this book you do have to take with a little grain of salt. The reason I say that is because its author is that the author of this book was an Episcopalian, so afford him a little bit of grace, and perhaps in the future I might attempt to do a Catholic rendition of the thesis that's in this book. Nevertheless, I still would highly recommend this book because it's of an older Episcopalian milieu, not so much of a newer one, because in this particular edition actually dates to 1884. All right, so this edition is from 1884. The book is The Gospel in the Stars, and it is by Joseph A. Seiss, or Seiss, S-E-I-S-S. And basically, what this book is, this book takes the symbolism of the zodiac, the fixed stars, and the planets, and renders them under a Christian paradigm. And so I'd say this book is sort of like the mold for the key that opens the doorway for the Sophiurgist to be able to, we'll say, to be able to practice astrology in the milieu of, say, St. Thomas Aquinas without scruples. Because, and I say that because there is an accusation out there among negatively superstitious Christians of every stripe, and I'll maybe explain later on what I mean by negative superstition, where the accusation is, well, we kept the pagan names of all the constellations and of the stars and the planets, therefore they're all demons. From what I remember, the demons are of the air, and so whatever has dominion over the celestial spheres cannot be demonic anymore, because as Revelation tells us, the dragon swept up a third of the stars. But we have the Virgin crowned with the stars. How many stars? 12 stars. One star for each tribe of Israel. One star for each of the apostles, and I'd say one star in the crown representing one of the constellations of the zodiac. All right. So whichever stars got swept up by the dragon in Revelation, I would argue are not it's then to say that demons still possess dominion over stars and over that which is good in creation, which is creation, then that's in a subtle way that would be a dig against the redemptive act of Calvary. So but yeah, again, this book, it's by an Episcopalian. Take it with a grain of salt, but highly recommend. Fascinating stuff. Of course, he tries to avoid admitting that Mary is the Theotokos and all that stuff that's a stumbling block to Protestants when it comes to anything that approaches Catholic dogma. But still worth a read, still worth considering. And I'd say an honest attempt to restore all things in Christ. So, all right, let me put that one up. We'll get to the next recommendation. All right. Why don't we do... Yes, we'll do this one next. All right. And then maybe I'll grab another one from over here. Okay. So this is going to be sort of, this next recommendation is going to be sort of a multi-pronged one. The reason being is that if we're going to take the liturgical life seriously, if we're going to pursue Sophiurgy in earnest, prayer is incredibly important. We have to have an ongoing daily practice of some kind, however complex, however simple. It all has to be heartfelt, without ceasing, if possible. One of the ways in which you can get started with something like that is to have something with which to spring off of. If you don't want to be, and in fact, I would recommend, if you're going to start out a rule of life, which you should have. Let me grab this. Grab these. All right. If you're going to do Sophiurgy, you have to have some form of practice, some form of prayer practice, daily prayer, or you will have no success. You won't be open to hearing the voice of the Holy Spirit. You won't be able to hear the voice of your guardian angel. You won't be able to hear the voice, most especially for us as Sophiurgists, the voice of the Virgin Mary, who I would say is the patron, the patroness of Sophiurgy, which I will eventually get into that, probably in my essay at some point. One of the easiest ways, I would say, to get started with that is to get yourself a prayer book. I have a vice of collecting prayer books, because I will draw from them and compile bits and pieces from each of them to be part of my prayer life. And so I have a few selections here. First and foremost, easiest, the Psalms. You can't go wrong with the Psalms. You never can go wrong with the Psalms. Whether it's a monastic breviary or something like this. I would probably suggest something like this. This is the Psalter from the Holy Transfiguration Monastery. They are an Eastern Orthodox monastery that have produced a beautiful edition of the Psalms. But what I like about this edition is that it has let's see here. There it is. So it has the rubrics for which Psalms you recite. All right, so if we go here, this right here, order of reading the Psalter for the week. And if you follow this schedule, you will read all 150 Psalms in a week. Now, these numbers you see here correspond to what are called charismata, which are these little collections of the Psalms. So there are 20 charismata in total, and each of them have 5 Psalms, thereabouts. Some have more, some have less. And the idea is that at, matins, you can say, is morning. So in the morning, you read 2 of the charismata, and at vespers, you read 1 charismata. And you select which charismata based on the numerals listed. This is a fantastic little Psalter. Also would recommend, and just don't come at me, because I know, don't come at me with this one, because I know there's a bunch of stuff happening in the church right now. and that there have been some announcements that have been made that have all the usual suspects up in arms, screaming schism like they're a demonic banshee that needs to have legion cast out of them into swine. But I would honestly, I would recommend the Society of St. Pius X's Christian Warfare. It's a nice little edition. Beautiful blue. It has all your standard devotions to the Blessed Virgin Mary, to Joseph. There's nothing in here. There is nothing in this book, nothing, that is contrary to the faith. Nothing. In fact, there's nothing in here where they try to throw in any of their rationale for existing or anything like that if you are opposed to the things that the SSPX does or anything. That's beside the point. Regardless of that, there's nothing in this little book that's going to try to convert you to be an SSPXer. All right, so you don't have to worry about that. Everything that's in here, fully Catholic. Nothing that's in this book's ever been condemned. It's just it's their compilation of prayers, daily practices. One of the things that I really like that's in this, that I don't see in other books, is the devotion to the Sacred Heart. I can't remember what page it's on, but it has, there's the, here it is, the 9 offices of the Sacred Heart. I never knew about this devotion until I got this book. But supposedly every month, in a group or as a family, lots are drawn to choose one of the 9 offices. Apply yourself to carry out every day from the first Friday of one month to the first Friday of the following month the office you have drawn. Place yourself under the august patronage of the Blessed Virgin Mary, who was the most perfect imitator of her divine Son, Jesus, and whose duty it is always to lead us to his Sacred Heart. Each office is done in union with one of the 9 choirs of angels. Following the recommendation of St. Margaret Mary, you are to look upon the good angels as your holy associates to honor, praise, and to love the Sacred Heart of Jesus in the most blessed sacrament, in order that the blessed spirits supplicate him and love him for us and for all those who do not love him. The means to practice perfectly the devotion of the Sacred Heart of Jesus and to be penetrated with the spirit of this devotion is certainly to use the different offices of the Sacred Heart. This pious practice was begun by Saint Margaret Mary Alacoque. Many words of this saint seem to indicate that our Lord himself was the primal author of this practice. And so so each, you have it lists the various offices: mediator, let's see, the repairer. And it tells you, it's the special goal for this month, to ask pardon for the outrages and offenses of men towards the Divine Majesty, above all in the sacrament of his love. There's a special promise, a special virtue, the maxim, and then the practice of the office. I would have never known about that had I not gotten my hands on this book, this little prayer book. Great little prayer book. The print is a bit small for my liking, but that's c'est la vie. Personal preference on that. Another prayer book I would recommend, and this is all sort of like one big recommendation, the Our Lady book by Father F.X. Lasance. Highly, highly recommend. This is a great book if you have a special devotion to our Blessed Mother, which I do. I did the Montfortian consecration in 2017, and I'm unofficially dubbing her the patroness of Sophiurgist. Just again, for reasons I hope to get into in the future. But this is a really good one. Another really good one of a particular Marian character is the Liturgical Rosary. This is the first edition. There's been a new edition that's thinner, gilded pages, same markers, same content, corrections to some of the typos that are in this first edition. Highly recommend. If you, I have a book review of this one. If you have not tried this out, highly encourage you to do so. This will change your rosary. You will never pray the rosary again after this. Excuse me. So, trying to think if there's anything else. I mean, read anything by Wolfgang Smith. Read anything by Wolfgang Smith. If you want to break the hold of modern atheistic and agnostic science, because in order to become a Sophiurgist, in order to do any of this stuff, in order to live a liturgical life, we have to divest. We have to free ourselves from modern thinking. Modern thinking has poisoned our access to the way in which our ancestors apprehended reality, the way that they apprehended reality in a Christocentric, theocentric, and immanent way. And so one of the ways that in which we can do that is by reading good books that help us to get our minds out of the spell, to get ourselves disenchanted from the spell of modernity. And one of the people who has helped me the most has been Wolfgang Smith. Highly recommend. Another recommendation, another writer that has helped me to gear myself more towards a more ensouled and livened, embodied faith is Sebastian Morello. I did a review of this book as well. Mysticism, Magic, and Monasteries, published by Olszewski Press, which is Dr. Peter Kwasniewski's imprint. This book got a lot of flack, got a lot of heat from the internet fungus, the internet fungi, the sedative contests. When the sedes on Twitter, they put a mushroom next to their profile name, so I just call them the fungi. I wish I could take some antifungal to the internet, but this book, really, really good book. It's more of a collection of essays that he had written, and he just edited them and compiled them in a way that it reads more or less like a cohesive book. Highly recommend. Another book to help break the spell of modernity, which was the original intent anyway. And then last but not least is this one right here. So for anyone interested in Sophiurgy from, say, the faith-based medicinal aspect, whether it's spagyrics, folk practices, and the like, this book is a good introduction to the history, the practices, with a list, with also a glossary of various remedies from the Pennsylvania German Bracherei tradition, also known as powwowing. This is The Red Church by C.R. Belardi. Just a really, really good introduction to Bracherei, to powwow, what it is, the practices involved, sort of a brief theology to it. And interestingly enough, the first person to compile all of the German and the Pennsylvania Dutch and Pennsylvania German folk remedies was a Catholic. Even though it was predominantly practiced by the Anabaptists, and from what I understand is still practiced today within the Amish community in certain places. having gone through the material, I don't really see anything that's necessarily contrary to the faith, except for some of the charms, some of the charms, and some of the various. There's a few practices that are listed that I think could be considered questionable. But of course, we have the ability to discern. We don't have to just take it all wholesale. We can distill that which is good and sublimate it in order to restore it in Christ and to use it for the betterment of souls. So this is another one, and one last one. Gosh, there's so many. But one last quick recommendation that I've made videos about in the past. Y'all should, if y'all follow my channel closely enough, you should know which one this is. St. Hildegard von Bingen's Physica. If you want to know how to do a faithful Catholic crystal healing, this is the book. And I don't care what Anthony Stein over at Return to Tradition says. I don't care what Matthew Menard has to say. I don't care what any of the sedes have to say. Hildegard von Bingen's a saint of the church, and she says there is such a thing as Catholic crystal healing, that it is licit, that it is good, and that it does not in any way fall within any type of pagan practice, so long as you do it the way she recommends. I would argue that anything outside of what she recommends the use of for the stones obviously would fall more into the New Age. But if you do things the way that she recommends, you can do it without scruples and remain in the faith. So, now, there are some that we have to tread lightly with, but there are passages in them that are worth consideration because they do have rings of truth in them. One of them being the Arbitel. This is the facing translation by Joseph H. Peterson. The Arbitel concerning the magic of the ancients. Why do I recommend this one? Because this is good to read in conjunction with Meditations on the Tarot. The reason for that is that Arbitel also does a categorization of magic similar to the way Tomberg breaks it down at the start of letter 3. But also there are some fairly good practices in here. So, like right here, just as a quick sampler for you. Of all these categories of magic, the most excellent is that which depends only on God. The second is that of those whom the spirits faithfully serve. The third belongs to Christians through Christ's power, which he has in heaven and on earth. So there's a whole bunch of little tidbits in there. Yeah. Now, huge caveat is there's some issue with the potential for trafficking in spirits, specifically given that it has a section talking about Olympic spirits. Now, I'll have to see and give Frater Acker's new book a look at to see what he says and what his research has rummaged up about the nature of these Olympic spirits through history. But yeah, there are some things in here worthy of suspicion. But overall, in many of the aphorisms that don't deal with particulars or of method and with specifics, not terribly off kilter with the things that we believe of the faith. Anything about Kabbalah, I am still up in the air about as of right now, just because I can see a path that I'm being shown, for lack of a better phrase, of inquiry and investigation to try to get to the bottom of where did the Kabbalah actually come from, and from there to discern what actually is worthy of consideration in it and what is not worthy of consideration in it. So until I pursue that path that is being laid out to me to investigate, I'm going to suspend any recommendations that I may have had in my previous recommendations video concerning material about Kabbalah. So, but that's all for today, my dear unknown friends. Please join us again next week. Not sure what we'll talk about. The subject of these videos just kind of come up almost on the day. So, excuse me. My apologies. I should probably make sure I have a cup of water or something nearby so that I can make it to the second hour. But I pray that you all stay safe, stay healthy, stay well. We'll read a few more of the chat, a few more comments from the chat, and then we'll wrap it up. So let's see. Lone Star says, marriage of opposites as the true hylomorphism, aka matter and form married together. Well, again, that the idea that it's thesis and antithesis is incorrect. That it's opposites. It's not quite opposites. They're complementary. Form is the complement to matter, and matter is the complementary to form. And when they are married together, we just look around you. You see the results of that communion, of that consummation, which is blessed by the Logos at the beginning when he says, let there be light, let there be a firmament, let the earth be separated from the waters. So take that, we can take that and run with it. That could be a whole separate video in and of itself. Lone Star also says, if the stars are demons according to such superstitious people, then they would be holding to a condemned thesis of originism. Yes, the irony. Absolutely. Lone Star also says, Christ also cleansed the elements stoicheia according to St. Paul as well. Yes, that is correct. The Jacobite Wiseman says, isn't music a type of natural magia? Yes. Yes. Short answer is yes. Long answer, you might find it in Agrippa's 3 books of occult philosophy. I know it's there. I also know that it's in the 3 books of life by Marsilio Ficino. And again, when I say you'll find it in Agrippa, what I mean is you'll find where Agrippa found it in his compendium. That's what the 3 books are. It's just a compendium of all this knowledge that he had a photographic memory of. He could remember all the books that he had read because, you know, when you needed to know something, you had to go to other people's libraries, and he was well-traveled. He was kind of in espionage, so he was in and out of libraries all the time, and he was a very bright young man, had an incredible memory. So yeah, that's where you'll find some material about music and the theological, mystical reasons why music is a form of magia. I don't know if it's strictly natural magic. It might fall somewhere between natural and celestial, because there is something about music with which, while the materials used to create instruments are natural materials, something higher informs the arrangement of the material in such a way that music is produced. So yeah, really interesting stuff to consider. All right, dear unknown friends, we'll end with prayer. In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit. Amen. Hail Mary, full of grace, the Lord is with thee. Blessed art thou amongst women, and blessed is the fruit of thy womb, Jesus. Holy Mary, Mother of God, pray for us sinners, now and at the hour of our death. Amen. In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit. Amen. Thank you all so much, my dear unknown friends. I wish you all the best. If this brought any fruit into your life, please like, share, and subscribe, both here on YouTube and follow me over on Substack. You can find me at Ignotus Amicus and at the Sophiurgist, which is the publication, the official publication of this channel. Thank you so much.